Hey everybody, my name is Wes Wolfe. I am the head coach and assistant general manager of the Cobourg Cougars in the Ontario Junior Hockey League. Recently named head coach actually in March of this year after spending 5 years as an assistant coach with the Erie Otters in the OHL. My presentation today is about developing relationships within the coaching staff and some of the things that go unsaid. But before I begin, I just wanted to say thank you to Ryan Stacey and the Hockey Minds podcast. I really think it's so impressive, Ryan's commitment to helping people in the hockey industry learn and grow and share their stories. And so it is a tremendous honor to be able to participate, and I'm really looking forward to all of the other presentations. But without further ado, here is my take on the coaching staff relationship and what we want each other to know that sometimes goes unsaid. And the genesis of this presentation really is, coming into Cobourg as a head coach. I have some new experiences over the last 5 years as an assistant that I think contribute to my philosophy, on building this relationship. Prior to going to Erie, I was a head coach for about 10 years, various levels of minor hockey and junior B. And then, for the first time, became an assistant and had an opportunity to see things through a different lens. And I think that perspective has really started to shape a couple things. One is, challenge my philosophies as a head coach of what that relationship looks like, but also, going back the other way, challenging, the assistant coach on what they should know from a head coach's perspective too. So that's sort of where this all came from. I think first and foremost, it's important, we're talking about the relationship with coaches is the foundation that we share. And number one is, who are you? And I think this is an important question to ask. We often get lost in sport, tying our personal identity to being an athlete or to being a coach, when there's so much more to us. My favorite phrase is that you are a human being, not a human doing. And, coaching hockey is what we do, but it's not who we are. I mean, we have families and we have friends, we have hobbies, we have interests. And oftentimes a sport can be very insular. And what we all have in common, of course, is hockey, but there are so many other areas that I think are important to building a foundation with a coaching staff that we all understand and respect each other, and our friends away from the rink. So who are you is the number one question to ask when you're starting, building this foundation for your coaching staff. Number two is, why do you coach? And I think this is really important because everyone has different reasons. Personally, I think there are three that are most common. Number one is we love the game. Of course, you don't take on this, this job or, this duty of being a coach unless you truly love the sport. And this is a lifelong love. It's a lifelong endeavor that, I think we all undertake because ultimately we love it. And then number two is, you have a passion for transferring knowledge or for teaching and for helping people. I know the reason that I got into coaching was exactly that. I love to help. I love to build relationships. I love to, guide people towards their own personal goals and objectives. And I think that's a big part of coaching. And then the last one that's very common, I think probably for any of us, is that we're competitive people. And this is a way to get that fix. You're looking to be in a competitive environment to win. I think there's really nothing like that feeling when you're pushing towards, a win or a goal with the team. It's a very special feeling. So I think, why we coach is because we're competitive. There are a lot of other reasons why people do this, whether it was financially motivated or maybe you have a family member on the team. It could be a legacy thing that it runs in the family. But understanding these things ahead of time as a coaching staff about why you do this goes a really long way in building that relationship. And then the last question is, how do we coach? And I think that's probably a really big question but it's something that needs to get sorted out before you start going about, developing that relationship between head coach and assistant coach. This is my own personal philosophy about the role of the coach and the role of the coaching staff. And this is something that is a shared role of everybody, but that's, for me, the 4 Ps: that we are prepared, we are present, that we are positive, we are passionate. And that's something that is required of every coach, as far as I'm concerned. So in terms of preparation, it's my belief that we, of course, don't rise to the challenge. We fall to the level of our preparation. And I think players recognize that preparedness in their staff, and they want to know that you've done your homework, because it's in their best interest and it's in the best interest of the team that you're trying to win. Preparation is a source of confidence, and it's something that you can always fall back on, because inevitably things are going to, come as unexpected. So the more you can prepare, the more confident you'll feel when those challenges do present themselves. Number 2 is present. And I think the best way I can, summarize being present is being fully conscious of the moment and being free from internal dialogue. And being present, is something that I think we can forget to do as coaches. You're at the tail end of a 3-3, or you're at the beginning of a 3-3, where you're in 3 different cities back-to-back nights. You're often looking to that next opponent. What's the next pre-scout? Or it could just be on a day-to-day thing that we forget to be present with our group. We're thinking about, the next day at practice or being home with our families. And I think that's a great disservice to your team and to each other if you can't be present. And then number 3 is positive. I think it was something that Barry Trotz had said at one time. It's probably attributed to a lot of people, but you have to act like your emotions are contagious, because they are. And being positive, is often misconstrued as something that, you ignore problems when you're confronted with them. Positivity, real positivity for me, is about, acknowledging that there is a problem, but also recognizing that there's always a solution. And I think as coaches, that's really the essence of our job, is constantly finding solutions to problems. And then the last part is being passionate. And this is something I talked about, sharing a love of the game. But, passion is about, of course, loving what you do, but it's also about modeling the behavior that you want to see in your team and in each other, and setting the tone. And the picture that I chose in particular here is of the Montreal Canadiens coaching staff. As we know, what they've recently gone through with Dom Ducharme testing positive, for COVID-19, and he's had to leave it to his coaching staff to, fulfill those duties in his absence. So when you're not present physically, there are these other P's that carry you through those times. And so obviously the preparedness that they had is something that's been able to, continue them through this really impressive playoff run. But I think also the positivity that they share, that they're going through this together. There was a great quote from Carey Price after they just beat Vegas that, this is very believable. There's such a belief in the group. You always hear people talk about how unbelievable it is when they're successful. It was really refreshing to me to hear someone say how believable it was. And I think that really is showing the positivity that this coaching staff has instilled in their group. And then the passion, as I said, modeling the behavior and setting the tone. The head coach isn't there, and yet they're able to continue seamlessly with their coaching staff to carry forward the plan. So I think, the role of the staff together is to embody these 4 Ps. And then, the last part before I get into this and looking at it through each person's perspective is the shared responsibility of coaches. And that is that we teach, that we are demanding but fair, that players understand their expectations, that everyone is accountable to each other and to the group, and that it's fun. Teaching is something to me that is synonymous with coaching. And probably goes without saying that every coach, whether you're a head coach or assistant, has to constantly have their teacher's hat on. But I think, where this starts to become a little bit, murky is what are the expectations? What are the standards of your team? And so when we talk about being demanding but fair, for me, that means, that like you are hard to please, but easy to get along with. And so, demanding means that you require your group to meet the standards that you've set as a coaching staff. And again, I've said this before, that you're modeling that behavior, that if you're going to demand a lot at everybody, you have to be living that yourself. And then be fair, and recognize that people are going to make mistakes and maybe not live up to that expectation all the time, but it's that they gave an honest effort, they tried to, and you figure out a way to teach and move forward. You want to have that permissive environment that allows for room to grow. And I think this goes hand in hand with players understanding the expectations. I've spoken a lot with the players that are returning to Cobourg and to our new players that, we're going to level up what the expectation is, that, the expectations are going to be extremely high. And I think that goes with the standards that you set, but it's important that they understand it, that you communicate clearly, that you operate with linguistic intentionality, that there is no room to misinterpret what the expectation is. Communication is the key to clarity. And then, accountability is, of course, about making sure that everyone's doing their jobs. But again, I think you can't demand people to be accountable unless you're accountable yourself. And that means that you are living up to the expectations that you've set. And then the last part, the shared responsibility of all coaches is that it's fun. We spend hour upon hour at the rink, on the bus, in hotels. If you don't enjoy it, it's going to be very difficult to get the most out of each other. And we do this for a lot of different reasons, but I think really the reason why a lot of us do this is that it is fun. And for me, having an environment that is inclusive, that celebrates differences in people, that builds self-esteem is an environment that I want to be a part of. That's fun. And, the winning comes hand in hand with all of those parts of this process that you need as a coaching staff. So as I mentioned at the start, there are things that often go unsaid or assumed that we often overlook. And having this unique experience now of having been a head coach for a number of years, become an assistant coach, in the OHL for 5 and coming back into this job as a head coach, that it's made me really reconsider some of the things that I thought were important or I thought were an expectation, of the job of each coach in each role. So I first want to take a look at, what are the things that an assistant coach wants the head coach to know? And I think the first thing that an assistant coach wants is a clear role and expectation. I want to know what my job is. What am I responsible for? And what standards are being set for me as the coach every single day? And sometimes this gets overlooked. You get into a groove of things where everyone's, operating at full capacity, everyone's busy, and we forget to make clear what we're expecting of people. And sometimes if that discussion doesn't happen, you can lose sight and kind of get lost drifting. So every assistant coach wants to know what their role is and what's expected of them. And what goes hand in hand with that is feedback. You want to know how you're doing. A lot of times, assistant coaches aren't necessarily as experienced as the head coach on their staff. And so feedback is, how am I doing? Am I living up to that expectation? And then giving direction. Sometimes it's really hard because an assistant coach is probably going to be responsible for something to do with special teams or, skill development, or maybe it's something off the ice that they're responsible for. And they don't know necessarily if it's going well, if they're doing it right, if there's feedback. So I think every assistant coach wants that from, the head coach, is to understand, okay, what's my job? And then how am I doing? I think, what's important to consider in this though is trust. So once the job has been laid out and the expectation is there, as an assistant coach, I want to be let to do the job that I was given. And I think this is a mistake that I've made in the past as a head coach, is micromanaging. It's very hard to let things go and to delegate as a head coach because, ultimately you're the one who's responsible for the product on the ice. But in a healthy relationship with the assistant coach and head coach, there's a lot of trust, and trust that the job that they were given is being done. And that being said, that there's room to make mistakes because assistant coaches are still learning and still growing into that role. There's going to be times where they misstep. And I think having trust that that coach on your staff has the room to make a mistake and learn goes a really long way in building that trust. And then I think, a big part of that is some reward. So if you're doing a great job as an assistant coach of the job you're given, it's nice to feel rewarded, maybe given a little extra responsibility that goes along with that, and see how it goes. The next thing is respect. And this, of course, is a core tenet of any relationship, that this is a really important piece of it. But a lot of head coaches have been in the position of an assistant coach before. And it's easy to forget just how time consuming some of that work can be. You could spend 20 hours of video for a 1-minute meeting. And that's often work that's left to an assistant coach. Assistant coaches, really don't get a lot of recognition or the same pay, as head coaches. And it depends on your level. Sometimes there's no pay at all. So it's important that there's respect, that the head coach sees it through the eyes of the assistant coach, whether it's a time-consuming study or it's, extra time spent at the arena after everyone has left, and have some empathy and put yourself in their shoes, of what they're going through, because being an assistant coach is a hard work, and, it's a lonely job a lot of the time. And then I think it's really important that, respect, you understand separating what public and private means in that relationship. And an assistant coach never wants to be criticized in front of anyone, especially the team, by the head coach. And what that does, I've seen this happen before, where an assistant coach is criticized in front of the team, that, it actually backfires, and the team can lose respect for the head coach, and they also lose respect for the assistant coach. So I think, it's important that you have that respect in public. And then privately, if something did go wrong, where maybe the coach didn't live up to the expectation, that you privately address it and find a way to work through it. But I think that's really healthy to have that respect. And then the last couple of things here, what the assistant coach wants the head coach to know, or what they want to feel, is empowerment. And we've talked about delegating tasks, but I think nothing makes an assistant coach feel more empowered than when they're given a chance to lead the group. Most assistant coaches would like to be a head coach one day. It's great training for them and a great feeling for them to be given something to take ownership of and be put in a position to succeed. So, you may not be prepared as a head coach to give up some of those things, whether it is the power play or the penalty kill or ozone play. Maybe it's something else like team building, or maybe it is booking travel and food for the team. But taking ownership and empowering the assistant coaches and delegating tasks and putting them in a position to succeed and making them feel important is really, really important. And, media tasks, that's something that, is often left to the head coach. But I think it's just as paramount for the assistant coach's development that they're empowered to do that too, that they can be an extension of the head coach and of the team, and trusted to do that job. And then, the last part is opportunity. And I alluded to this, but most assistant coaches do want the chance to be a head coach one day. And so from the head coach, what they want them to know is they're looking for professional development and they're looking for growth. the best way that a head coach can do this is by sharing some of their connections in their network and helping them get introduced to general managers or other coaches within the league or in other leagues, so that, one day maybe that opportunity will be there for them. And I think sharing that knowledge and sharing that experience, with your staff goes a really long way in building all of these other areas that we discussed. And so going back to empowerment, I just have a quick video here from the Miracle movie with Herb Brooks. It's a short video here, so I'm just going to play it because I think it's a great example of a head coach being challenged about, their delegation and empowerment, and then the head coach's response, which obviously I think was great. So I'm going to play the video now. So obviously, in that particular clip, Herb Brooks was challenged, by the media about why he wasn't delegating those tasks and keeping the attention on him. And sometimes, as a head coach, you often forget how that might feel, from the eyes of your staff. I think, not everyone wants to be in the limelight per se, but I think the opportunity, to speak on behalf of the team and develop those skills with the media, and show that you're as much a part of the group is important. So I think anytime, that task is delegated, it just adds a little bit more, feeling of importance, to an assistant coach or someone in a support role. So moving on from that, again, I'm coming into a role as a head coach after spending 5 years from this other perspective. But there are things that I'm going to expect of my coaching staff, and from the eyes of the head coach. And I think getting the experience as an assistant actually helped shape some of these things, what my opinion is, looking at the other side of it. So number one is communication. And that's something that's obviously been a common theme in this presentation. But, the head coach wants to know from the assistant coach what's on their mind. How are they feeling? How does the team feel? How are things going? That's something, the head coach gets really busy. The biggest difference that I've found from being an assistant to a head coach so far is the amount of time I spend on the phone dealing with things that aren't related to, the team on the ice. And so it's easy to overlook things sometimes. And I wrote temperature here because I think it's the job of the assistant coach to understand the temperature of the locker room. And sometimes you have to act as a thermometer and gauge the temperature of the team. And sometimes as an assistant, you're expected to act as a thermostat and set the temperature. The head coach isn't necessarily as close to the players on a day-to-day basis as the assistant is. And so, you need the communication from a staff standpoint. If something's going on or you feel something within the team as an assistant, that the head coach needs to know about it. And then another big part of communication is just input and suggestions and feedback. During the game, you're going to have your own observations. And again, the head coach has so many things to worry about that they may be overlooking something. And so there needs to be that trust that you're going to be able to communicate to them things that are going on. Second thing that I'm looking for as a head coach in my assistant coach, or I want them to know, is investment. I want them to be invested in the role of being an assistant coach with the team. And that means commitment. That means showing up early and leaving late. It means doing what needs to be done, whether it is booking travel or it is being asked to set up the camera before practice, or it's any of those things that go along with, work that needs to be done. Show that you're committed and show that you care. And I think work ethic obviously is something that, when I talk about being accountable, having to set the standard first, as a head coach, you should be setting the standard for your team. In the event that you're not going to be there, model that behavior first, that you're the hardest working person. But the expectation then is that the assistant coaches can live up to that. And then I think, again, getting back to the topic of assistant coaches, being ambitious and wanting to move on, that those assistants are where their feet are, that they're not constantly, looking over the fence, looking for other jobs. During the season, the expectation is for them, most of the time that they're committed to being with the team. Towards the end of the year playoffs, sometimes there may be job interviews or people asking for permission to speak to your staff. And I think, most head coaches are going to be understanding of that, and they want to be able to promote their people. But I think the expectation is that as long as their feet are inside the four walls of that locker room with that team, that you are where your feet are and that you stay invested in the group. I think something that every head coach wants from their assistants is that they demonstrate initiative. Sometimes there aren't tasks to be delegated, and sometimes there are going to be lulls in the season where you're just in the routine. And I think every head coach wants their assistants to come with new ideas, continue to bring energy and positive attitude to the team. And I think what goes hand in hand with this initiative is healthy discourse. We're not looking for yes people as assistants that are just going to, reaffirm everything that we think we already know. There should be some conflict and there should be some difference of opinion, challenging behind closed doors, not in front of the team, but in front of each other in that coach's office, that you can challenge each other's beliefs and come to a consensus. That healthy discourse is a big part of, what a head coach should be looking for from their assistants, or what they want to tell them is, challenge me. And then ambition. And I use this particular picture, because of the coaching tree that exists. Some of the best head coaches in the history of the game, if you look at who their assistants are, they've often promoted them on to being head coaches elsewhere. And this particular photos of the Detroit Red Wings, Todd McLellan obviously has gone on to be a really successful head coach in the NHL, as has Paul McLean. And they worked with Mike Babcock, and that coaching tree continues to grow. So showing that ambition that, yes, you do want to grow and you do want to continue to learn. And one day you do want to become a head coach, I think is something that I want my assistant coaches to know. And then alignment. We talk about healthy discourse, but there still needs to be consistency in messaging. And I think this goes hand in hand with communication. But as a staff, my expectation is, as a head coach, that we are consistently aligned in messaging and belief to the team. So behind closed doors, we may be challenging each other and having healthy discourse, but once that door opens and we're with the team, everyone falls in line and everyone's delivering the same messaging. And when we do have disagreement, it doesn't mean that there's difference. There might be times where you argue and you don't have the same opinion, but when you come to a consensus about what's going to be communicated, that everyone jumps on board, everyone is aligned, and everyone is bought in because it's in the best interest of the team. And I want the assistant coaches to know that as the head coach. Loyalty. And this is something that I think can be very challenging. You know, from an assistant coach's perspective, I think there are always going to be times where you question the head coach because you do have your own opinion, and that's okay. You know, but what isn't okay is losing that loyalty to your head coach, whether it's, you know, with the team or maybe it's behind closed doors or behind the back of the head coach. You know, are you still loyal to the coach and bought in when it's you talking to ownership or the GM as an assistant, you know, to media or to fans? You know, I think it's really important that a head coach can trust that their assistants are loyal and they're not going to feel stabbed in the back by someone selling them out, you know, for their own personal gain. And so publicly, that loyalty is important. That being said, you know, I think ethics are a massive part of coach. We're being entrusted. We have, you know, a position of power, and there are examples of loyalty within a staff that are toxic and not okay. And so I would never expect my assistant coach to cover up anything that would be an ethical issue. I want the loyalty that if it's something that's happened with another staff member, that, you know, loyalty is not going to stand in the way of doing the right thing. Or if for some reason, whether intentionally or unintentionally, a line has been crossed, that ethically the assistant coach has an obligation to bring that up to the head coach. And it works both ways. But I think, you know, loyalty doesn't mean that you have this code of silence and it's protect each other at all costs. There's still, you know, a moral obligation, the responsibility that we all share as coaches to, you know, operate lawfully and with integrity and with character. And so that's a big part of loyalty. What the head coach also wants the assistant coach to know is that they're looking for support. And being a head coach is an equally lonely job as an assistant coach for a number of different reasons. But I think number one is you wear the wins and losses and ultimately bear the responsibility when it comes time to keeping your job. You know, it's almost never the assistant coach's name that's in the newspaper, that's never being questioned, you know, on message boards or getting fired because the team is in a tailspin. And so there's emotional support that the head coach is looking for from the assistant, that, you know, you are in that foxhole together, that the assistant coach is there, you know, if it is to have a tough conversation, you know, if it is just to listen, if you're going through a tough time, whether it's at the rink or at home, that you have emotional support and you're there for each other. I want the assistant coach to provide perspective. I think that's a big part of support. There are times where, you know, it's hard not to attach your emotions to outcomes or, you know, to things going on with the team. I think it's the assistant coach's job to take a step back and provide a different perspective that might be able to help enlighten the head coach, that they're not seeing the whole picture. And, you know, I think for the assistant, it's a lot easier to have that perspective because you're not the one necessarily who is wearing the wins and losses. But keeping in mind that you don't want to be over glib or over positive in a situation that maybe the head coach just needs you to listen. So perspective, but also understanding, you know, when to provide it and when just to step back. And then I think togetherness, you know, at the end of the day, as I said, you're going to spend so many hours together, you know, that it becomes a de facto family during the hockey season. And I was just, you know, so impressed and taken aback after Tampa Bay, you know, won the Stanley Cup last year, that John Cooper, you know, had the respect and the wherewithal to, you know, bring his whole staff to the podium to celebrate that moment together. And, you know, all of the trials and triumphs that you go through together, It's an emotional journey, but that support that the head coach is looking for from the assistants is reciprocal, that the assistants feel it from the head. And that was just a great moment that they shared together, and a good example of, I think a very healthy head coach, assistant coaches relationship. There are some things things to consider when working together. And I've touched on a lot of these, but I think, again, once you've formed your staff or are forming your staff, these are critical things to consider. Number one is, what's your connection? Can you socialize? Can you bond? Do you have friendship that goes beyond the game? Everyone that I've met, for the most part, in hockey is a professional, and they find a way to work together. But, in the absence of having connection or friendship, it's going to be really difficult to spend that time together, because you're going to be together in social situations. It's not just going to be 100% hockey all the time. And having that genuine human connection, that you like being in each other's company and that you can go for a coffee together and completely forget about the game, I think is something that's really important. What's the program philosophy? If you're going to work together, it needs to be a shared vision. What do you believe in? What are your values? If you don't have those things that are aligned, you don't believe in the same things, then it's not going to work no matter what. How do we teach what we teach? I think, what words you use, and what is the way that you're going to teach it? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is you going to play good cop, bad cop? There are things that you need to understand if you're going to work together. What's the teaching style, and how do you put people in positions to succeed within the group? I think that's really important to consider. And then style of play systems, obviously, once you've got your staff, again, it's this shared vision that you're all bought into that style and aligned once you go. And I think that's all part of doing it our way, whatever you've decided. One thing that I would recommend, I know that Ryan always asks in the podcast, is for book recommendations or resources. This is something that was brought to my attention by TJ Manistersky, great friend of mine who's just taken a job as an assistant coach at Union after being a head coach for several years at Curry College. We've kind of done this role reversal where I've gone from being an assistant to a head, him being head to assistant. But this was something that he recommended I read, and that's The Tough Stuff by Cody Royal. 7 Hard Truths About Being a Head Coach. And I was on a panel discussion about this with coaches from other sports. And it was very interesting to hear from head coaches that they viewed this book as therapy or, rehabilitation in some ways, because it is an emotional book. It dives into, some of the really hard things about being a head coach. For me, going from being an assistant to a head, it provided some great perspective, and was almost like prehab. It was like getting ready, for the injuries that are about to come that go along with it. But it is a really tough job, and it's something that requires great mental fortitude, and having a group that understands what the tough stuff is and why it's so tough it's really important. This is a great read, and I recommend anyone interested, by all means, pick it up. This is my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have and follow up, or otherwise questions about anything really. I'm happy to help share resources, support. One of my favorite things about hockey is, of course, the relationships that you make along the way, and building a network. Something that I've been really proud of is, the relationships I've been able to build and sustain throughout my time in this game. And so by all means, email me, send me a text, call me, follow me on Twitter, Instagram. That's all the information that you need right there. But again, thank you to Ryan, Stacey, the Hockey Minds podcast. I think this is just a fantastic opportunity for anyone interested, and really appreciate all the hard work that goes into it. Looking forward to the other presentations. Thank you for your time.